Okay, it's almost time to begin. So, let me introduce myself. I'm Romain Picard, from French Energy Regulator. I'm co-chair of Cybersecurity Workstream of CEER. We are here today for a cybersecurity workshop of CEER. And I hope you will enjoy this morning talking about cybersecurity issues on energy. So, to introduce that topic, I will, as many people say and as many people do, talk about an incident. Not a cybersecurity incident, but nearly. When my future president of authority has gone to the parliament to have his audition to be appointed as president of CRE, he has many questions to be selected. Some on nuclear power plants, on networks, on, let's say, things like that, EDF, the things which are important for, let's say, the energy networks, also on gas, because gas is also important for energy. But when somebody asks him, and what about cybersecurity? And then, blank. He doesn't know about it. So, he has a second chance, hopefully for him. When he goes then to the Senate the day after, he got a note from my part explaining what's cybersecurity in energy. But as you see here, cybersecurity can be an issue, even it's not a cybersecurity breach. It's important to know about it, and for instance, for him now it's really important. So whenever I want to go to Brussels now for talking about cybersecurity, I have no problem. So now we have 3 sessions this morning. The first one I will drive is about the CEER Cybersecurity Report of 2018, last year. Then we will talk about the future network codes on cybersecurity, while we have now a clean energy for all European, which is published. And to conclude, we will speak about cybersecurity in energy consequences also for other sectors. Let's say now, let's start with our roundtable. I will so shortly present you the work CEER did on cybersecurity and the report we had. So, why did we did such a report? We have first to have a unique point of view to present in front of other stakeholders, DSO, TSO, and also the European Commission, to give a public position in order to foster and facilitate open discussion, and to provide also concrete inputs. So it's quite important to be, let's say, one in front of many. The main message in that report is that there should be cybersecurity, but cybersecurity has a cost, and we won't approve solutions which have a too high cost. We want to have an efficient solution with cybersecurity. We should also encourage, as NRA, let's say, cybersecurity in energy. It's important to have it for us in clean energy for European, and we are happy with the version which is now published, while cybersecurity appear clearly in the directive, in both regulation. So we have to discuss about the price with, for example, our DSOs, but also we may promote the culture of change about that topic. Well, let's say in accordance with a CEER, which we will see then after, because Stefano, which is part of the discussion, will discuss also with the topic, and is with me co-chair of the cybersecurity workstream of CEER. And then NRA should evoke the role of Chief Information Security Officer. And I understand we have one part of the panelists, so we can clearly discuss it. And at the end, we think that DSO, TSO, and supplier should have a robust cybersecurity strategy. The report proposed monitoring the cost in an explicit way, just to say we don't want to hide it. There is a cost. We want to have it clearly explained. We provide an input on rethinking technology to the grid, to having in mind that cyber incident when we design the grid, to think the grid robust to cyber security. And so the report underlines the lack of knowledge in many areas. So it requires some work for the future to help the regulators in this new field. So what are the recommendations which were in this report? First is let's say what we call the NIST limit, and what are the operator of essential services. We say that cybersecurity doesn't stop to that players. All the players should have cybersecurity requirements, not only operator of essential services. And maybe the more near as possible. NRA also encourage the meeting of compliance to NIST, because it's quite interesting to have a NIST directive, but if it's not applicable, it's a problem. We want to have the compliance to the NIST. As I told, the Clean Energy for Whole European package now is published, so it provides means to potentially cover cybersecurity needs to electricity. But keep in mind that as regulator, we are not regulator only for electricity, but also for gas. So we have a mean for electricity, but we'll try to think also for gas. And we know that NRA need to be prepared to monitor and evaluate cybersecurity costs. So we keep that in mind. And the other recommendation, because there are many recommendations on this report, is that let's say, all sectors entities should have a management which is aware about cybersecurity. I'll explain you, my management is now aware, but it has a cost. he may have lost his place. So now it's important that anyone understand that cybersecurity is a topic. And we want that also the DSO, TSO supplier have cybersecurity strategy to be clear and an effective measure to go through. And at the end, we think that CEER and a CEER should promote cultural change through activity. That's why, for example, today we want you to be there to discuss about it. So that will, I think, be enough to introduce completely the report of CEER. But let's say now I leave the floor to Michaela, so she can have a talk about that.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. And of course, thank you very much for your report. It was very interesting to read, and I can say that some of the elements in the CEER report already addressed by the European Commission. And that's why I will give you a short overview of what we are actually doing at DG Ener, so that you know how we address cybersecurity in the energy sector. No. If it works, voila. So in this slide, it's actually just one slide I will show you. I will cover a lot of things. So first of all, I give you the policy background. I will tell you a little bit about the history, how it all built up, and I will also tell you what are our actions and where do we stand today. So it all goes back with of course, the horizontal cross-sectorial cybersecurity legislation and policy. So it already started in 2013 with the cybersecurity strategy, which had the aim to make the European cyberspace one of the safest in the world. Then in 2016, we have the first European law for cybersecurity, the NIS directive. And this directive was followed in 2017 by the cybersecurity package, which also included the Cybersecurity Act. This Cybersecurity Act will enter into force end of this month and is already published in the official journal. But for us, was always the question, is this enough for the energy sector? Or is the energy sector special for cybersecurity implementation? So do we need to look at something more? And the answer is, of course, yes. And we discussed it a lot with the stakeholders, stakeholder community, so with TSOs, with GSOs, also with regulators, to identify, but why is it so special? And we came to these three particularities, which are the real-time requirements, the cascading effects, and the technology mix that we have out there. But I will say a little bit more about this on the next slide. But just to see how we reflect now cybersecurity in energy legislation. So as you already mentioned, we have the Clean Energy for All European packages, which already acknowledges cybersecurity very well. In the electricity regulation, we aim to have a network code on cybersecurity, and also in the risk preparedness regulation, cybersecurity is well addressed. But also already in the security of gas supply regulation, cybersecurity needs to be considered for the risks. So as you can see, this is the legislative part. But when it comes to cybersecurity, it goes a little bit beyond just this. It's very important to keep in mind that there are also soft measures, so to say. And there's actually quite a lot that is ongoing on this side as well. So in 2018, we had some stakeholder consultations with different stakeholders because we really wanted to know what are the needs, what is already addressed, where do we need more. And the outcome of this was actually already some points that you mentioned before, was for example that operators would like to have more guidance on the implementation of the NIS directive. And due to this, we initiated a dedicated workstream under the NIS Cooperation Group, just dealing with energy. So it's really dedicated to energy, and it's the first sectorial workstream of its kind. And there we bring together the member state authorities from energy and the member state authorities dealing with cybersecurity. From all member states, of course, to have a good communication ongoing and to exchange their best practices. The second point that I would like to stress here is that it was also wished for guidance that goes beyond the NIS directive. And that's also what you mentioned before, that not only the operators of essential services can be addressing cybersecurity, but everybody, even the smallest operator, should really deal with cybersecurity. And that's why on 3rd of April this year we adopted the Commission recommendation on cybersecurity in the energy sector. And this recommendation, so it's a recommendation, now really addresses these three particularities that I mentioned up there, like the real-time requirements, because you don't have the time for encryption at some points. You really need to address it differently. For energy, obviously we have these cascading effects, which are within Europe, but they also go beyond. And especially for cybersecurity, it's very important to keep this in mind. And then the technology mix that I meant before is that we have a lot of legacy systems out there which are now connected to smart devices. And all these smart devices are connected to the internet and also to these legacy appliances. So this can cause a lot of problem, and that we have to address. And that's why we issued this Commission recommendation, where for each of these particularities, we really propose concrete actions and recommendations how to address it. And the last point that I would like to address here is actually information sharing, which is super important, and everybody knows it, but nevertheless, there are different levels to information sharing. We do a lot of initiatives for information sharing at the higher level, so we have a lot of conferences and also workshops, but then also down to a more technical level, because it's also important to bring these cybersecurity experts that we have together to also work on some issues. For example, what we do it right now, it's for the expert group 2 of the Smart Grids Task Force to bring together these experts to really work on the ground for this network code that we proposed in our legislation. And the last point is also that we also aim to enhance the cooperation with the European Energy Information Sharing and Analysis Center, because this is something, it's really important that information also after an incident is well shared and that we can learn out of it. So that was in a quick summary what we are doing in one slide, more or less. And as I already addressed the point, it really reflects also what you said before. And yes, that's it from my side.
Thank you, Michaela, and thank you for being so efficient and quick on all this description, which is quite a good big picture of what happened. So now I leave the floor to Marin.
Thank you, Romain. Thanks. Oh, something went wrong. Thanks for the invitation. So we are from the gas sector are aware of this approach for cybersecurity, and as you can see, we have joint cooperation with ENSO-G together with Gas Infrastructure Europe. So we formed a couple of months ago a joint task force. So we this task force was established in September 2018, and we have in total 46 members consisting of both organizations. We had a look in the, actually our main topic is the possible network code on cybersecurity. And actually what you, Michaela, mentioned before, we had also already analysis of this smart grid task force. We understand that the results they will provide would be the basis for the possible network code on cybersecurity. We also follow up the recommendation which were issued by you in April. Also these three main sectors, the real-time requirements, cascading effects, and a mix of different technology, which especially for the gas sector, this is interesting since we have a lot of old, let's say old system, the SCADA system, and now with the mixture with the Internet of Things devices, which will be a very interesting part for us to analyze. And based on these recommendations, we will analyze which parts are applicable for the gas sectors, since the gas sector is quite a bit different than the electricity sectors, especially looking into real-time requirements. Maybe this is not 100% applicable and for the gas sector. We appreciate this information sharing, so we also organized a workshop together with Enzo E. It was on the 15th of March this year. And furthermore, we learned that our similar organization for third countries, non-EU members, called the Energy Community, is also following this approach. They hosted a workshop in Vienna on the 11th of April this year. So we participated there. We learned a lot of things. Yesterday I participated in this Making Europe Cybersecure. So there are quite a lot of workshops ongoing right now and information sharing sessions where we are actively participating. So this is actually our status quo. What our next steps are, you can see on the next slide. So we are preparing a survey regarding, we would like to know the implementation status of the NIS directive among our members. So far we are analyzing what were the recommendations, but we want to know where we are as together N2G and GIE. We also investigate how to handle this topic of information sharing, either for cybersecurity incidents or at least for cybersecurity threats. We understood from our members that some of them are not allowed by regulation to share this information, since they are identified as critical infrastructure operator. So this is our next goal, to see in which amount we can share this information among us. We are aware this will require a lot of manpower, so that's why we are investigating a potential cooperation with a consulting company. We already get in touch with them. And we already were in touch with the German Institute for Cybersecurity, the BSI, Bundesinstitut für Sicherheit und Informationstechnik, and we welcome our planned cooperation with them. So we are already in touch with them regarding existing topics about encryption and signing for messages using in a gas business for easy gas, EDIGAS formats. And we would like to extend this cooperation and information sharing also on future topics on cybersecurity. Digitalization is also a possible task for us. We discussed it in our last meeting. Digitalization is actually a very broad term, so we would like to focus on operational security. So it would mean how can we secure the new approach of digitalization in when we focus, when we look into the SCADA or metering system. Digitalization could be also understood as digitalization of working space, let's say Microsoft Office 365. This is not our scope. We would like to focus on our operational equipment, as mentioned here, SCADA or metering. And we are waiting for the final report of the Smart Grid Task Force 2. We had a look already in the interims report, but the final report, as we learned, should be published within the next days. Hopefully. So that's where we are right now from the gas business. And yeah, we will continue following and attending these workshops and cooperation with you, either the Commission or with the CEER. Thanks.
Thank you, Marin. So you found your colleague to Euroelectric to find Ioannis. So I leave the floor to you, Ioannis, from Euroelectric to discuss further for the topic. After gas, let's talk about electricity.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ioannis Retsoulis. I work as a senior advisor in Euroelectric, involved inter alia in cybersecurity matters. I would like, first of all, to thank CEER for the kind invitation and the opportunity given. I'm pleased to be here today, not only because the workshops of CEER are well known, but also because today's topic we find to be certainly important and rather interesting. I would like to start by saying that Euroelectric is an electricity association based in Brussels. We represent the common interests of the electricity industry at pan-European level, and we represent, among other entities, almost 2,400 DSOs. I would like to mention a few things about the context in which we are having this discussion. We are facing certain changes in the energy system. The energy system is transitioning, it's becoming more decarbonized via further electrification. At the same time, it's becoming more digitalized and more decentralized. And these three elements themselves, they highlight, on the one hand, the significance of cybersecurity, and on the other hand, the even more important role of DSOs in the future. Firstly, because they will need to deal with an attack surface that will be continuously increasing. And secondly, because they will be faced, in first instance, with many of future attacks. So the cybersecurity challenge will certainly necessitate changes, and these changes imply expenditure. And there we see that the role of the NRAs is critical, as they need to accept and approve the expenditure. We believe that they should be forward-looking, and certainly the aspect that you mentioned of cost efficiency is a very important aspect. Now, to link all this with the report of CEER of last year, we believe that this report, alongside initiatives such as the EG2 report as an initiative, are certainly in the positive direction. They are a step forward, and this is for two reasons. Firstly, because there is awareness. And there is awareness mainly towards high-level management and decision makers. If high-level managers do not understand the necessity of cybersecurity and the changes that it will entail, then we are in trouble. So we need to make them aware. The second thing they do is that they establish a common understanding. And when we have these two factors, increased awareness and an established common understanding, then the expenditure and the funding that is needed is more easily to be accepted by society as a whole. Now, to finish off with two technical, let's say, aspects of this report, but of all reports that we would like to see in the future, what we advocate for from the technical side is firstly for reports and a future, potentially future network code on cybersecurity that are technology neutral. And this is because like that, we can easily incorporate future use cases and future technologies. So whatever is depicted in such reports, we believe that it should be considered as non-restrictive and non-exhaustive. And the second thing that we strongly advocate for is for selection of standards that itself is not restrictive. This means that it's not only current standards that should be taken into account, but also future standards, common criteria documents, and national white papers as reference documents. So this is it from my side, and I look forward to the discussions afterwards. Thank you.
Now we got commission, we got the gas, we got the electricity, but we all work for customers. So last but not least, Federico, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you this morning. It's well, I guess most of you know my colleague Monica. She's a team leader at Bilco on the energy sector. I work mainly on cybersecurity. And let me start by saying that in generally we support the recommendations that were just presented a few minutes ago. We do believe that the NIS directive is a key rule, a regulatory instrument that will change the whole framework and how we see cybersecurity in Europe. Someone mentioned already how important is the enforcement of a rule, and indeed we often hear in conferences that the rule is as good as its enforcement rules. So we would really encourage you to look at this very seriously, because if the NIS directive is not implemented in a serious way, and this means if there's not a market surveillance mechanisms and if penalties are not implemented, unfortunately the impact will be much smaller. And this, I was in a conference last year on the health sector, not on the energy sector, but I heard that the national authorities were complaining that given that the GDPR and the NIS directive entered in force more or less at the same time, the health national authorities were complaining that somehow the NIS directive was overshadowed by the GDPR in terms of human resources, financial resources, and basically they were complaining. I don't know if this is the case of the energy sector. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. So I would just like to highlight, of course, GDPR is extremely important, but I would also say that the NIS goes hand in hand with GDPR. So I think in order to have a really digital ecosystem, which is where the data is private and secure, we really need the two, these two strong instruments. Just to finish, a point that was already mentioned as well, that for us is somehow missing in this report, is the relationship between the Internet of Things and the energy sector. Because we have national consumer organizations, so our members are telling us more and more that Internet of Things products, basic products like smart fridges, smart locks, smart meters, are too many are insecure with very basic lack of security. Some don't have passwords, others are not updated, others don't have any sort of encryption protection. And you might ask, what is this related? What's the link with the energy? And there's actually a link with energy, and it will increase in the future. I think everyone agrees with that. I think there are two ways of where Internet of Things products can have an influence in the energy sector. The first one being, what if the product is the entry point into the critical infrastructure? There are several examples where this happened in the past. I mean, I can give you a few. In 2008, hackers accessed the control system of an oil pipeline, and the vulnerability was found in a security camera. In 2013, hackers stole 40 million credit cards from a US company, 40 million credit cards. And the entry point was the air conditioning system, connected, of course. And this, although it's not a critical infrastructure, I find it really a fascinating example. Hackers penetrate into a casino through a connected fish tank. So I wouldn't imagine why a fish tank would be placed in a power grid, for example, but it's just to explain you how broad and how wide these examples are. So this would be one of the examples of how smart products can somehow have a negative impact in the smart grid. Another way of doing so is when connected products are gathered in the thousands into an army of zombies, of computer zombies. It's what we call a botnet. And it's becoming increasingly frequent. I have to admit, last week when I received the news in my smartphone about what happened in South America, about the outage, the electricity outage, I was like, is this a botnet? But apparently it isn't. But I think we all know that it will happen eventually, unfortunately. And the example is really, it can happen with smart meters. What if someone hacks thousands of smart meters and turns the heating to the maximum level at the same time? It will probably overload the system and make the grid to shut down. And but it happened with smart meters because it's a product that I guess talks more to you, but it can happen with a smart plug, with everything that is smart. So that's really what I would like to convey to you today. It's that I fully agree with the Alliance Directive and with the work that you have presented, but in this digital environment, we cannot split between critical infrastructure. Of course, measures have to be higher, but we can't forget these small products. We also can influence critical infrastructure. There's a very well-known cybersecurity expert called Bruce Schneier. He's an American. He's on Twitter. He has like 300,000 followers. He's very, very good, and he's constantly raising this point that today we can no longer speak of critical infrastructure on consumer products, because these products somehow will influence the critical infrastructure. And that's a point that I would like to raise. It's on the Cybersecurity Act. There are three risk layers, and one question I'm always asking in conferences that I attend is, how would you measure the risk of a smart meter when at the end of the day it can still strike down a critical infrastructure? It's very hard for me to understand how these products are low risk, medium risk, when they are all connected, and at the end of the day they all present a very similar risk. So for us, it will be, we will encourage you to look into this. BILC is asking for security requirements for connected products. We know that the UK is looking into legislating this, and yeah, for us it's really part of the solution, in addition to all the other recommendations. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward for the debate.
Thank you, Federico. So now I will ask the floor if you have some question to raise us. No. Also, I will maybe ask a first question to launch the discussion, but don't leave me alone with my colleague. If you have some, imagine and ask me. So I will ask Michaela because you're near to me. So, Michaela, what will be the next step for the European Commission on that cybersecurity topic, do you think?
Well, our next steps will be definitely to go ahead with the network code on cybersecurity, because we see it's very important. So we have to do something. We are already intensively working now with the already named before EG2, this expert group 2, to prepare this ground. This report will be one of the inputs we will take into consideration, and then we will go ahead with this. Another point is, of course, what I mentioned before, to really assess the risks, because that's what we need to do for our risk preparedness regulation, like the national and the regional risks have to be assessed by the member states. But of course, we would like to address this as well. Another point, and it relates what the colleague mentioned at the end, what we would like to have a deeper look into certification of energy products, which means we really want to analyze if there's a specific need to go into this topic, and we would like to do this, of course, with the stakeholder community. So we plan to have a workshop in autumn to really discuss further on this topic, because we see it's very, very important. Yeah, that was it from my side.
Thank you very much, Michaela, and it seems to be, let's say, enlightening the questions, quite interesting to know what's going on and what is going to happen. So let's say then I will ask to Marin. Yeah, now while we talked about electricity many times, but here gas. What's your contact with electricity and gas? What do you think it's gonna happen together?
Yeah, we are quite close in contact with the Smart Grid Task Force too, especially with this one person, Keith Buzzard. So we are quite close. We look how our cooperation could succeed and which parts are also applicable for the gas sector. And as I mentioned before, we also like to see how our sector is implementing the NIS directive. What information can we share? Do we have an added value from this information sharing? So we are also thinking about, if we have a lot of information, then maybe we can introduce something like we have similar approach for the remit reporting, but maybe we can apply it also for cybersecurity. Let's call it urgent security messages, so threats and possible attacks shared among our members. And yeah, of course, look into it to work together with NCE, since we share also the same building. We're not far away from them. Yeah. And further on, and we'll continue looking from the legislative side, what are the requirements, what's the time plan to implement this. So yeah, we are in a starting phase, but we are totally aware of this topic.
Thank you. Let's. I will say now. I will ask Ioannis. You told us to be, let's say, open-minded, unclosed to the topic, and but as your neighbor told us, the problem is maybe very, very open, because it's not only electricity, it's gas, but also anything is around. So what do you think is the limit of the approach for you where do you think you should stop talking about, say, cybersecurity for electricity and speak about cybersecurity for other person, not you, but someone else?
Well, I think that if we start thinking purely in the context of, for example, smart grids, it becomes apparent that there are interdependencies. And then when you start talking about sector coupling and system integration, you realize that all these interdependencies can be exploited as vulnerabilities. So, of course, the holistic approach should be there, but we need to also see from a risk management point of view what can really contribute into, for example, having a major incident at European level. So certainly the holistic approach is there, certainly the interdependencies are there, but we also need to focus on what can have a major impact. And when we have this in mind and we work on the risk management, it becomes more clear where someone needs to target. And certainly, for example, as I mentioned, the distribution grid is of high importance, especially in the future for the reasons I mentioned. So we expect future attacks to be organized in that direction. We have seen the incidents in Ukraine. We know about them. Now, on the side of our customers, we certainly are very much concerned about security, about smart meters, about the fact that in the past the energy system and the grids were not designed to be neither bidirectional nor to be connected to the internet. So now they need to be connected to the internet and they need to be bidirectional. And this, of course, paints a completely different picture for which we need to really take it into account and look into the details.
So, Federico, let's have a question from let's say customer point of view. Do you think there can be, let's say, a kind of responsibility of DSO for anything, or do you think that there's also a responsibility from the customer part when the breach come from his part?
Well, interesting question. I think the burden should not fall on the consumers when they are purchasing a product which is by default insecure. So we know that smart meters, there are examples of smart meters which are insecure where they are when they are bought. So I think here it's really a question of regulation also in the end because at the moment, so we've heard that there are many products which are not secure. And at the moment, there is not any single piece of EU legislation that we can use to take these products off the market. So if you complain to anyone, look, I bought a smart meter, it's insecure, there's nothing that consumer organizations can do, that national authorities can do at the moment to take that product from the market. So that is a problem. That is a really big problem. And the Cybersecurity Act, as well mentioned, and of course it will put in place certification schemes. And it's interesting that the Commission is working on the energy products, but it has a significant flaw, which is it's only voluntary, meaning that even if we come up with a certification scheme, which will probably be linked to a standard, there's no obligation whatsoever from the manufacturer of the different smart meters to follow those rules. So in the end, I'm not sure that the whole framework we have today will change. So for us, it's really about creating the right regulatory framework to ensure that it changes. Again, on top of the NIS directive, on top of other high-level regulatory instruments.
So, last chance for a question. Janesh.
Slovenian Energy Agency. I would like to know regarding the proposal of the network code, will there be some priorities set starting from the system critical operations and then further on what is the most important scope of the stakeholders they should do the, let's say, check the maturity level of cybersecurity they have implemented? Will it be overall stick to the standards or defining the scope and then apply the standards?
I just would like to answer this because the network code, we are not yet, the process of the network code did not start yet. Where we are right now, it's an informal process, like to prepare the ground from an expert level. So the experts, they were really working very hard on it, to say, to provide this report, which will be hopefully published on our website within the next weeks. But only afterwards the official network code process can start. So just to make this clear, but I think your question was more addressed to Euroelectric, because you mentioned it before.
Just to mention what I said previously in relation to standards, since your question referred to that, and I will also give a more holistic answer to what you asked. So as I said previously, for us, we really strongly advocate for a selection of standards that is not restrictive. This means that other reference documents, such as future standards that are under development, or common criteria documents, or national white papers, they should be taken into account. And the second thing is the technology neutral aspect, because if you are too restrictive in documents, especially documents that will be in the future EU regulations, if you are too restrictive, then it becomes difficult to incorporate new technologies and especially new use cases. And as the system is transitioning, we will have very quickly, we will be having new use cases. So on the other hand, I had been involved to a certain extent in the EG2 report and the work that has been taking place. It's not only the maturity framework, it's a holistic approach. So it's the awareness system, it's the risk management, it's a several concepts that altogether will provide some means to be more secure in the future. And I'm very, very carefully with the words I use, because it's not having in the future perhaps a network code that will solve everything. We do not believe that this will be the remedy for all. It needs to be accompanied by other also means. It needs to be accompanied by awareness. I mean, if you don't save your password at all and you leave it on your desk, and then you say the device is not good or the grids are not really taking any measures, then there is nothing grids can do. There is nothing anybody can do if your password is on your desk. So it's this holistic approach that we need to take into account. And once again, any network code will not be the remedy for all.
So now I see that the clock is running, and I think it's time for going for the next roundtable. But while we discuss about the network code, and the question is about the network code on the next session, I will leave the floor to my colleague Albert Jan from Dutch Energy Regulator. Albert Jan can come. And we'll leave you the floor.
Thanks. Okay, I would like to welcome my guests to get a seat. Yeah, like Roman is saying, time is running quickly. But it's nice to see you all here. Always when I have this kind of meetings about cybersecurity, I get a quite cozy feeling. I'm also involved in implementation of other network codes. But there, quite often, it's a zero-sum game. I mean, it's about who's going to pay for some cost. Is the TSO paying for it, or is the market participant paying for it, or is country one paying for it, or country two? But in cybersecurity, actually, I think we all here have some kind of common enemy. It's the mysterious hacker, whoever that may be, somebody who wants to have some money, maybe some other states who has some other meanings. But I think we have all the same aim, and that's to keep them out and to get the grid safe. Of course, we have some discussions, but I think we want the same. Most TSOs and DSOs I know, they are quite eager to implement, and of course some are more mature than others, but you see they really want to implement. But there's also some point they need each other, and that's why I think we're discussing also today about the network code, because it's a mean to actually that it can work together to secure the whole system. Of course, my guests are going further into. I as regulator, I really welcome the network code. Of course, there's also a point of discussion whether, and I think that's the main discussion in this roundtable, whether we miss out things, whether it's maybe concentrating on the wrong subjects, or maybe it's brilliant. That we will find out today. But as regulator, I really welcome some extra rules about how this can be performed. Because at the end, I think we need this kind of rules to really get forward with it. Let me introduce my guest. I will start with Frederik Geerts from the European Commission. He has been studying computer science, so I think he really knows about subjects. He also has been working at the DG for Information Technology, also on cybersecurity. And I understood that you also have been working in the energy sector, so you have a quite broad range, I think, what needs to have a good network code. My second guest is Alexander Dussault from NSOE. I think you all know NSOE. He's manager of network code implementation. Myself, I've been working, I think, the last 4 years on other network codes like CACM, FCA, system operations. NSOE has done a lot of work, much more than a race on it. So I'm glad you're here, that we don't have to reinvent the wheel again when we want to implement this kind of codes. My last guest is Jeff Montagne. Sorry. He is the CISO of Enedis in France, but also he is on behalf of EDSO. I think it's really important that DSOs also get involved, and so we is really involved DSOs. You see, sometimes I think it's good that they also have a strong say, because when it comes to cybersecurity, they are equally important as the TSOs, and since they are more, maybe even more important. So let's start with the presentation. Can I give you the word?
Good morning, I'm Frederik Geerts from the European Commission. Thank you for the invitation for this workshop. I actually didn't prepare any presentation, since my colleague Michele Collat already gave you a nice overview of what legislation is already out there. And I think it is important this morning to stress that in cybersecurity, one size doesn't fit all. There is already a lot of legislation, there are already a lot of standards, but the average interconnected system is not the same system as we have in the energy sector. So we need to maybe address this in a different way, of course. This is a specialized sector, and we are not a Facebook, we are not a common internet system, we are a different sector, and we need to address this differently. So there are these particularities, and we need to take them into account. So we think we need to go ahead with this network code, and this could solve not, of course, all problems like one of the other panelists has said, but this could raise the bar and could improve security in our sector. So as Michele already said, the things that we looked into are the particularities of this sector, like the real-time requirements. We have these real-time requirements. Sometimes there are circuit breakers in our systems. They need to act in milliseconds, and we don't have time to look into encryption, we don't have time to do authentication or these type of classical measures that we take in cybersecurity, especially in IT security specifically. There are a lot of classic things that might not always work in the energy sector. So how do you defend such a system? a system that has no time for security. In some cases, we really have to act really fast. So how do we cope with that? That's really important, and that's one of the things that we want to address in these network codes. There's also this part, of course, on cascading effects, has already been mentioned this morning as well. So you are not alone, not as a sector, not as a country. You might have effects on other sectors, you might have effects on other countries. If you have an issue, you might cause a blackout in another country, or even in member states outside of the European Union. So we really need to take this into account. There have been incidents, for example, in Germany that had implications up until Morocco, I understood. So this really is something we need to take into account. And as mentioned as well, this third part that we want to consider is the technology mix. There are a lot of legacy systems. Some of these systems have been designed 20 or 30 years ago. They are still in place. We can't patch them, we can't update them, they are still running, but they have to interconnect with new systems, with new technologies, with the Internet of Things, with smart meters, all these kind of new technologies. So how does this work together? This new technology might impact this old technology and the other way around. So we really need to take this into account. And there are new scenarios coming up, as mentioned in the previous panel as well. What if everybody turns their air conditioning on at the same time? What if all of these smart grid vehicles, they start to charge at the same time? This can have a huge impact on our grid. But it's not only the critical infrastructure that we have to indeed protect, also consumer applications or maybe connections to these smart meters or to this grid might have an impact. What if your iPhone or maybe your Android phone has a virus but can still control your air conditioning? Or even today there are apps that control your vehicle, your smart vehicle, your electric vehicle. If it starts to initiate the charging of this vehicle, but not only for your vehicle but for all vehicles in Europe at the same time, this can have a huge impact on the grid. So we really need to take this into account. So a lot of this work has already been discussed in the task force 2 of the smart grid. And as Michaela said, this is one of the inputs that we're taking into account for the network code. This is not the only input that we'll take into account, but of course this is a good work that has already been prepared and should be coming out in the next few weeks. Now, we also issued a recommendation by the Commission on the 3rd of April. And there again, we also want to go a bit faster, of course, because this network code is not going to be a fast process. This is going to take months, this is going to take years before we have an actually established network code and have it fully implemented as well. So we didn't want to wait, and that's why the Commission issued these recommendations to act a bit faster, to pave the way for future work, and to already have something to work on, and that will follow up on, of course, as well. Now, in there we stress, of course, the same things, and one of these things is the skills shortage that we have. There are not enough cybersecurity experts, and especially there are not enough cybersecurity experts with also energy sector knowledge. So of course we applaud any training and awareness raising that we can do, such as this event, and I understood that a lot of you were also attending a training the last few days. So these are things that are really helping out to raise the awareness and to increase the focus on this topic. Now, we're not only gonna limit ourselves to these things, we're gonna organize a lot more workshops, a lot more stakeholder meetings. So we welcome, of course, also your input on this network code. So we're more than open to receive your suggestions and feedback on how we can do this, because like I said in the beginning, there is already a lot of legislation out there. There are already a lot of standards. We really need to focus our efforts and see where we put our priority and where we go first with this. So any feedback or input that you have is more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alexander, you had a presentation on what you already said. It's a long implementation process, but we get more details from you.
Thank you very much. Slides coming, yeah. So I'm Alexander from NCE. I place Keith Buzzard. He's the cybersecurity expert. So I'm the network code expert, and he briefed me. But I rely that all the others have already quite some knowledge on cybersecurity. I'm coming with a bit of a mixed message here today, and I feel a bit squeezed actually, because Keith explained to me very well why we need a network code for cybersecurity. On the other hand, our board really wants to avoid new network codes. So in my slides also you'll see first recommendations from the Smart Grids Task Force and reasons why a network code could be good. On the other hand, show the network codes process and where we are with the current codes and showing why does the board want to avoid new network codes? Because it's a lot of effort and we have to plan for it. So here the high-level recommendations from the expert group 2. Basically summarizing, you need minimum cybersecurity requirements for all operators and then more advanced ones for the operators of essential services. Keys describes the problems as the different levels of cybersecurity in the different companies. So all TSOs across Europe are connected, but there are some who are on very high levels of cybersecurity. Others are on very low levels and have very few people working on it. So to get the overall system more secure, you would want to include a minimum level for cybersecurity applicable to everybody and binding for everybody. So yeah, and this goes together with some member states have already identified their operators of essential services, others didn't even do it. So here binding legislation could really help in getting this step further. This relates to this ISO certification 27001, which is developed and implemented. Also here it's critical to see what level of harmonization do you need. Do you make the requirements for the standard too low? Then actually it doesn't mean anything. If you make them too high, it's really a pain and maybe you can't even certify anybody. So then it's also the target's not met. So this seems to be under discussion. So the benefits of the standard and making the standard binding would mainly be two things. It would be implementing governance structures and defining key cyber roles, and implementing the risk management processes where the companies also define the tolerance for the risks. And yeah, you see the content for the operators of essential services. That would be then for protection of current infrastructure, supply chain cybersecurity, protection against cross-border and cross-organizational risks, and I think this is a very, very critical one, and the active participation in early warning systems. So good reasons for actually having a code. So how would it look like drafting a code? So the network code process actually hasn't much changed with the clean energy package. It's pretty much the same. Again, the Commission asks Acer to write a framework guideline. So this is what we've done with the existing codes, but this is also to come for a potential new code. So first, Commission decides and asks Acer to do the layout. And I think we had the question before: could we focus on some areas? Do you already have focus areas, or can we prioritize something? And I believe this is part of the framework guideline. Basically, in this first half year, where Acer drafts the framework guideline, this is where the focus is set, where priorities are set, and where Acer defines what should be further developed. So the framework guideline would be a shorter paper. Afterwards, NCE, or previously, NCE got the pen. So this is not anymore necessarily the case. So I think even on the cybersecurity topic, it's actually really, really good that the DSOs are on board, and NCE is happy to support them and be working together with them. But it's good that it's a common approach. DSOs may even be further on the topic than TSOs are. But this is something new. So before it was NCE, now it's both organizations. We know that the European DSO entity is not yet implemented. And this will be quite crucial for the decision making. So the good thing with the network codes was that we got a qualified majority voting process in the TSOs. No more unanimity anymore, but you really could take decisions forward. You could make decisions and didn't get stuck in unanimity discussions leading to the smallest common denominator. But of course, it will be a new challenge to cooperate, and we have 6 committee meetings a year where such decisions will go through. Then the DSOs will set up their entity and have a committee meeting where they can decide. This will have to be kind of aligned. This will be, in the end, it's 12 months drafting process, but 2 months are gone for consultations, and then already we lost, before the consultations, we lost a good month for our internal approvals. We had drafting team, working group, committee, so you lose a good month on that. It will be even longer with cooperating. So you lose that before the consultation, you lose that before the final approval. So out of the 12 months, you maybe have half a year maximum for real drafting. And that also means you need to prepare. The association stakeholders need to prepare what do they want. They need to feed it in early. They need to take part in the consultations and express their views. Yeah, then Acer writes an opinion on the code to the Commission, and finally it goes to the comitology. Also, comitology can be quite a process. So comitology meetings where all member states are presented would take place every 2 months. For some codes it went quite quickly, 1 or 2 meetings, and got approved. Others took much longer actually to get approved. I think CACM was one of the longer ones. So you were right, the process is probably, we can talk about a year or even years until we have a final network code. Here just a slide we also presented on the Florence Forum expressing our a bit of concern on this process. You may know from the existing codes there's network codes, like the connection codes, requirements for generators. They're quite clear. They have tables in the end with data. You have to fulfill this parameters to be connected. So that's very clear requirements. Others, the CACM code and the balancing guideline turned into guidelines. And the reason behind is that actually the initial network codes got so complex that we agreed to write further methodologies. So CACM and balancing are accomplished by 10 to maybe 20 methodologies underneath them. So you would have to write methodologies to really get where you wanted to get initially with the network code, and making it much more complex. And yeah, once you're in this guideline thing, writing methodologies, you see it's a long process. Many of the methodologies have been written and approved. Others are still in back and forth with NRAs. So on the right side, you see this circle. TSOs draft something, they send it to the NRAs. NRAs can send it back with a request for amendment. Then TSOs send it back to NRAs. NRAs may then not agree and can send it to Acer. And also happened that Acer actually asked for TSOs for changes. So I believe we had 26 methodologies or so, and 16 came back. So more than half that came back to the TSOs or went to Acer directly and led to further discussions. So what we can conclude here, we don't really like writing new network codes, but we see there may be a need for cybersecurity. So we should be pragmatic here. We should have clear requirements. We should have a clear process, and should be aware that it really takes resources for everybody. And so we need to have a good planning to allow for these resources to ramp up in the associations. And ideally, we can keep it a network code, be clear in the code, and avoid making it a guideline with the multiple of methodologies behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm grateful for this experience sharing in drafting and writing network codes, because DSOs are newcomers in the process of code drafting, and it is quite a challenge to raise the resources and the skills and competences for this to make it properly and well. And regarding the network code in itself, as you said, it's a time-consuming thing, but it may be a good thing for all DSOs. There are many DSOs in Europe, more than 2,000 from any size, and that's maybe the biggest challenge for us to manage to have a unique position and a homogeneous position in this question of cybersecurity. And it could be good, I said this, because not all DSOs are designed today as operator of essential services. So there are two different kind of DSOs. I mean, the main ones that would be, will be, or are already designated as an operator of essential services, and that will have to implement a lot of things, and the rest of the DSOs. So this network code, it is a way to adopt an approach that will be that will help all the DSO from all sides to implement a consistent set of rules and practices. And this is the good news. The bad news, and it was related to the previous discussion, it has a cost. And the question of the methodology to estimate the cost, whether it should be efficient expenditure, of course, but the methodology is quite important. For example, for a DSO of the size of Enedis, 35 million of customers, almost 40,000 employees, there's a big IT budget, and we could figure out to a kind of rule like, say, 10% of the IT budget should be devoted to cybersecurity. Means, I mean, kind of factory, cert, well, all the policies to implement and the cultural change to ensure. But what is 10% for a very small DSO? 10% of the IT budget, it's not sufficient to make this cybersecurity policy efficient. I mean, so the discussion about the coverage of expenditures would be key in this aspect of network codes, and was the first of the point I wanted to point out. And the second one, it relates to what Frederick said. The fact to reach secure level of trust for energy and electricity delivery. It does relies on the trust on the TSOs, on the DSOs, but not only. There is all the supply chain of energy that is embarked. It concerns also generation. It concerns also the supply and all the kind of connected tools that can be that are connected and can be commanded by through iPhones or whatever kind of or hack. For example, last year there was a kind of a specific advertisement on the TV in the US, which said, "Alexa, what is I don't know which kind of burger," and it triggered all the Alexa devices, appliances in millions of homes to answer, to look at the internet and answer, okay, this cheeseburger is a very nice product from this kind of company. So what would be happen if all Europeans were equipped with a kind of Alexa or Google Home or whatever, and then there is a trigger which say, Alexa, switch all the devices on or off, and it can also be a very simple attack. So we need to consider the whole change of supply until the consumption of the energy and through the devices in the home. And for this, we also need to take into account, we'll say the dynamic evolution of the threats related to energy. For example, we know that for the last months, the threats of energy-related cyber attacks is rising, because of tensions between big states like US and Russia, US and China, and it has become the cyber threat has become a part of a weapon for states. So this kind of information obviously cannot be embarked in a network code, but a network code should also take this kind of need for information sharing and between the energy supply chain, but also between the national cybersecurity authorities. So this is more related to the NICE directive, NES directive, but it could be also it should be also a point to address in this. So that the main points for this.
Thank you for this talk. I think I have quite a lot of questions, but I look into the hall. Are there people wanting to ask something to those gentlemen? You get a phone, microphone.
Thank you, Valeria Palmisano with Edison. Thank you so much. So, a question for the Commission, but also for you, DSO, probably. We said that, and we heard before that the level of security should be ensured across the value chain. But if I understand correctly, the main receivers of guidance will be the network operators. Would you envisage any specific guidance also for power generation? And let's imagine also for the retail part, since they are somehow the main interface with the consumer, especially in perspective of services and connected devices. Thank you.
So yeah, just as Michaela replied, this is not the only thing that we're doing. This is cybersecurity is one of the focus points of the Commission. This is one of the part of the Security Union. It's part of the Energy Union. This is a really important topic for us. So the clear scope of the network code has not been fully defined yet. One of the inputs is this EG2 report we've been talking about a couple of times, but there are multiple inputs. So we are still looking into what is the exact scope and how we're going to address this. But of course, this will not be the only initiative. There will be more initiatives. We already issued a recommendation. We might issue more recommendations. There might be other topics we're doing. So any needs that you see or things that you have are more than welcome, and we can definitely take them on board. And this might be through this network code. This might be through other initiatives. There should be different ways of covering this need.
Yeah, I think as the fact of network code will address specifically TSOs and DSOs, it will have to be completed by other kind of processes and or legislation, maybe national related, to consider energy supply as a strategic, critical asset, the function as a whole, and if the network code is well addressing the one part of the energy supply chain, the rest should be also covered by any kind of other legislation. Probably in France, it's linked to the kind of a military provision law to make sure that this energy supply is secured and safe.
Okay, thank you for those answers. I saw one more. Yeah, I think we are almost running out of time, but I saw one more question at the back, if I'm correctly.
No, Stefano Bracco from CEER. We talk about time and about the time of the network code, but I want just to provoke a bit you. What do we have plans if something really happens? Meaning, we have been talking about a 2 years time frame, but it looks like we rarely talk about having plans. And I've been talking to the Ukrainian people, and I know that after they had the incident, now they are working on plans since more than 3 years. And they have something, but I'm wondering, do the EU in general, and I'm asking to the three of you, as plans from DSO side, TSO side, generation side, because as it was said, it's something that made, and we don't know where it will lead. Thank you.
So what to do in the short run? Who dares to answer?
So as I understand, in what you can do in the short run is the certification, which you can promote. So we heard that before. Many workshops being organized, knowledge sharing is done, incentivization for hiring more people on the topic, and developing, implementing this 2701 standard. But of course, it won't be a binding legislation. So, a good question: how can you incentivize member states, generators, system operators to implement them and use it in the good way?
Well, for the DSOs, as the association representing the association EDSOs, well, there are more than 70 DSOs in this association, and with the consequent size, but it is not representing all the 2,400 DSOs among Europe. So it's difficult to mention a kind of a plan for all these players, these actors. So, well, I think every company has to endorse this responsibility and set up plans to go in this direction. We got a lot of documentation and recommendation available. For example, not to mention this EG2 report, but there are others too. And there are also norms and standards, not only the ISO, but also the IOC has lots of standards that are usable and implementable. So the idea is, as you said, to raise the skills, the competencies, the resources, and make sure that this is aligned with the national regulatory authority for this cost coverage issue.
Thanks. I give the last word to Frederick.
Yeah, it's a pertinent question. It's not an easy question to answer. Why? Because cybersecurity is a difficult topic. It's not something that you can easily fix. It's not something that is stable. It's something that is changing. Threats are changing. Hackers are finding new things. New incidents are happening. Digitalization is happening in the energy sector. So it's a moving target. So from the Commission side, if we want to legislate this or if we want to make rules for this, it's very difficult because we've seen like the process of a network code, it takes a lot of time. So we want to make this right, we want to make this work. In the meantime, we have our recommendations set out as well. But I think everybody has work to do in this area. I think regulators have a role to play. I think companies themselves have a role to play. Consumers have a role to play. We have to do this all together. Cybersecurity is not easy. It's a process that we need to improve. And it's about people, it's about technology, but it's also about the way we work, the processes, and how everything goes together. So legislation alone is not going to save us and is not going to improve cybersecurity in this world. We need to raise awareness, we need to know about our risks, we need to know how we're going to address them. We need legislation to raise the bar and to make cybersecurity better. But we all have to work on this together, even the regulators, even yourselves and people in this room as consumers. Everybody needs to work on this to make this work. It's not an easy topic. It's something that we'll be working on for the next years and then the years to come after. This is something for the long run.
Clear answer. Depending on the time, sorry. We still have a session after Stefano's session when we still can ask questions to these gentlemen on these topics. But for now, I want to thank you for your presentations and your answers, which were not always easy. So, yeah.